Greetings, day 14. Happy Valentine's Day if you're listening on February the 14th. This is a continuation of the reading of Martha's Pearls, chapter by chapter 14 on February 14th. This has been my gift to you and the world, reading the book out loud and offering these videos to get these teachings out to the whole of the world. Chapter 14, Crisis. You going to keep listening? Webster defines crisis as number one, a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, as in the current economic crisis. Number two, a synonym for emergency, disaster, catastrophe, calamity, predicament, plight, mess, trouble, dire straits, difficulty, extremity. 3. Crisis, a time when a difficult or important decision must be made, as in a crisis point of history. Number 4, more synonym. Critical point, turning point, crossroads, watershed, head, moment of truth, 0 hour, point of no return, doomsday, as in the situation has reached crisis. 5. The turning point of a disease, when an important change takes place, indicating either recovery or impending death. I've been reflecting lately on the word crisis and the way the word crisis strikes me when I hear it. How did it strike you today when you hear it? A friend called and said she was headed out of town for a holiday weekend and received a crisis call before she got even to the edge of town. After hearing her describe the situation, I could not relate to the request made of her as a crisis. I asked her what made it a crisis. She could no longer relate to it as a crisis either. I heard another friend say her daughter was in a crisis. And I asked, what does it mean? She replied, her life just doesn't work. These are examples of living our life in response to a concept of crisis without actually stopping to see, is it? You may have noticed when you call certain phone numbers, doctors or medical institutions, they say, if this is an actual emergency, call 911. When I received the notice of the death of Robin Williams in September of 2014, I was as deeply affected by this news as I've ever been by the death of a celebrity. In fact, I was shocked at just how much I was affected by his death. I was also filled with gratitude for his life, for his work, and now astonishingly awakened by the depth of the suffering of souls that have all the ways and means to get help, and the reality that there is no way for them to be helped and even to help themselves, and for loved ones wanting to help, the impossibility of that. That seems like a crisis to me. What is crisis to you? In considering a response to this, again, and maybe like most, I first refer to some very personal experiences with what I have believed crisis to be. For me, crisis is meant, for example, a ruptured appendix, gangrene, peritonitis, and a coma at age 14. My dad having perforated bleeding ulcers and collapsed lungs, multiple collapsed lungs. This was routine during his last couple years of life, that in all cases required emergency transportation, ambulance, and intensive care stays. My baby brother died unexpectedly at age 40 from a massive heart attack. I've had friends commit suicide and failed attempts of suicide. In each case, I thought the thing similar about the crisis was in every case, it had a beginning and an end. I'm still questioning whether it does or not. Death seems to mark the end, certainly of the physical. However, the crisis that causes the death, depression, despair, apathy, addiction, rage, disease, may not end. Doesn't seem to end sometimes. Where does that leave us? I also think about the survivors of the crisis. Are we the ones who are stuck in a crisis mode? Are we living more of our life like we're in crisis than when we're actually in crisis? What about when we can't help? What about attempts failing? Or when the end means death? What about the survivors, the caregivers? When or if does it actually end for them? What is your experience of crisis? Is it a true crisis? Or like me, if I'm not careful, I call it a crisis when the plane doesn't take off on schedule. Or I call it a crisis when I receive a diagnosis I don't like. Or when the cities flood or a basement leaks. Or when a loved one goes into rehab again. Or when a partner may have had an affair. Or when someone doesn't pay back the money that I loaned them in good faith. Or when the chemo treatments are not working anymore. Or when someone simply doesn't want to suffer anymore. These questions come to my mind and perhaps to yours. Yet, perhaps the most important question I can ask, or you can ask, or we can ask is, can we find peace in the mystery of what is? Can we find peace in the uncertainty, the unpredictability, and yes, in the questions and the unanswered questions? I accept the mystery of the universe. My peace depends on it.